Madam Speaker, I rise today to really beg this body for something, and that is, I rise today to beg this body to do something about this slow motion tragedy that we see as crippling the next generation of Virginians. Our schools have been closed in Virginia since March of 2020. That's now over 300 days and counting. And when we closed our schools back in March of 2020, it was because we all acknowledged there were a lot of unknowns. At the time, it was not known whether our children would be significant spreaders of the virus. But thanks to the hard work of the men and women in our scientific labs, we're no longer operating in the dark. And now, luckily, we have a much better idea of what we're up against. Now, I hear all the time in this chamber that we have to follow the science. And I guess my response now is, what has the science now shown us? The CDC notes that this virus is seldom transmitted from child to child or from children to teachers. And a large number of private schools have begun face-to-face learning again in September. And by and large, it's gone well, they're adapting, and they're learning again. And even Dr. Fauci has noted that we must find a way to get our kids back in school. But what we've seen in Virginia is a two-tier system. Our private schools are open, our public schools are closed, and now we've seen dramatically different results. And those results, Madam Speaker, are nothing less than tragic. Educators, parents, medical professionals are seeing firsthand the absolutely devastating impact this is having on our children. Now, let's first realize that even prior to this all virtual learning experience that we're putting our children through, the American Academy of Pediatrics was already sounding the alarm of too much screen time for young people. Prior to the pandemic, they noted a, quote, a growing body of evidence suggests that the use of media while engaged in academic tasks have a negative consequences on learning for children, end quote. So we've seen by some surveys an over 500% increase of children spending over 6 hours a day watching electronic screens. And the American Academy of Pediatrics is noting that for some children this works, but for the vast majority, these kids are experiencing apathy, indifference, and aggressive behavior. So what I find most startling as well is at a time when we're having a national discussion about inequality in our nation, and everybody in this chamber recognizes that education is one of the great equalizers in our society, we've decided to shut down this avenue of success to the very children that need it the most. Wealthy families can afford tutors in private schools. It's the middle class, it's those families facing economic challenges that this has created the greatest heartache. And in Fairfax County, kids are failing at classes at a record rate they've never seen before. More Fs have been given out than any time in the system's modern history. It's worse for lower income children, Your Honor, Madam Speaker, and we're failing them. In my own area, Hampton Roads, I was talking to a mental health professional seeing over a 30% increase of children and teenagers that are suffering through anxiety, depression. We're seeing skyrocketed number of suicides, violence, and illegal drug use. This is not unique to coastal Virginia. It's not unique to our Commonwealth. The New York Times just reported on a nationwide survey the closing of public schools have led to a complete mental health crisis among our kids. They looked at Clark County, Nevada, where they've had 18 students take their own lives, one as young as 9 years old, and over 3,000 alerts that have gone out dealing with children's mental health. Madam Speaker, if you've ever had a loved one that has been trapped in depression or addiction, they will tell you social isolation is the single worst box you could put them in. And that's exactly the box that we're putting so many of our children. If you have a child or if you know somebody with a child with an IEP, with learning challenges, this is absolutely positively devastating. One education expert told me, this is like sand going through an hourglass. This is time these children cannot get back, and it will forever impact their ability to learn. But there are worse consequences than falling behind, because children aren't simply designed to sit at a desk and watch a screen for 6 hours a day. They're isolated, they're alone, and quite frankly, for some, it's killing them. Carrie Daugherty published a column recently where she just published some emails from some teachers, and they're absolutely heartbreaking, Madam Speaker. Let me read a couple of quick excerpts. This first year alone, I've had over dozens of students miss class due solely to mental illness. I've had meetings with parents where they're begging the teachers and administrators for help. The fact of the matter is, while our children are falling behind academically, that is not my biggest concern. My bigger concern is that our children are suffering. Another letter. I worry about my kids every day. I try to make sense virtually, but it's simply not working. I can't see their faces. I can't hear their voices. I mostly feel like I'm talking to myself. Have you ever been in a Zoom meeting for 6 hours? How in the world can we call this an education? And finally, as one teacher noted, schools are essential to students. Students should be made the priority. And instead, they're being left with no other choice but to stare at a screen all day. And so, Madam Speaker, I'm begging you, I'm begging the majority party, I'm begging everybody here, we need to do whatever we can to get our schools open again. There's obvious ways we can do this. We know the science. We can go back to school safely. Too often in government, we often pass legislation and restrictions, and we often don't pause to think of the unintended consequences. And when those consequences become apparent, it's too easy to either pass the blame or not accept responsibility. Madam Speaker, this body has found the time to ban styrofoam cups and ban releasing balloons. You know what we haven't done? We aren't listening to the parents who are begging to see, and they're seeing their children struggle every day. Madam Speaker, it's time to reopen our schools. We're failing these children. We're losing these children. Our children are crying out for help. It's time to help them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.